And when rapid speed down to 2500.
Good point. Wherever you reduce speed to 180.
Blackbox.
All right, hey gang, KP here, KP's Blackbox. Welcome back. Today I have the honor and the privilege to interview my father-in-law. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, wait a minute, Kenny. Didn't you say you interviewed your father-in-law a couple weeks ago? Well, when you're as special as our family, we have multiple father-in-laws. Right, Grandma? Yeah, grandma's off camera. You can keep her mic on, Jake. We're kind of a little nervous about having a hot mic on Grandma because she starts cussing a lot. So we'll try to keep you under wraps. But off camera is my mother-in-law. But my father-in-law, the great Mark Olesen, the great Captain Mark Olesen, who served 20, how many years in the U.S. Navy?
29 active, 4 in reserve, so 33 total.
33 years. Well, thank you, sir, for your service.
Oh, it was my honor.
They paid you, right?
Yes,
yeah.
And they still do.
And they
Praise
still
the Lord.
So my father-in-law, Mark Olesen, here today, and then off camera, my mother-in-law, Paula Olesen, who also served the federal government and alongside our military greats. And Grandma, thanks for your service. How many years with federal service?
28 and a half years.
28 and a half years. So we'll talk about that, talk about where you guys met. But for me, the reason on KP's Black Box that we want to talk to veterans, for obvious reasons, those veterans who, Mark, sometimes go on and become entrepreneurs and business owners. But I have a close friend who you know, Lou, who gave me the idea through his personal experiences to interview veterans from all walks of life who, have given a life of service to the military. And it hit me with Lou specifically. He served 33 years in the Navy, Naval Special Warfare, and his parents never really knew what he did, because he lived a life of, the high-speed, low-drag, secrecy.
Sure.
But he wanted to do something for his parents as he retired. And he was like, Kenny, can we do something in the studio? The interview with Lou, Mark, it went 8.5 hours.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
It was the longest podcast interview I've ever done. Now,
Wow.
we didn't publish that one because he wanted to keep it private for his family. But
Sure.
what that spawned, the inspiration of that, was, man, I've got these family members who have served, distinguished careers and gave proctoral exams to U.S. presidents who... we're just kidding, President Bush, but maybe not. That will never be told, right?
Medical confidentiality, that sort of thing.
So, excuse me, my father-in-law, a physician in the U.S. Navy, and served in multiple. Excuse me, I got a cough there, Mark. Can you diagnose that?
I take a shot. That's my prescription.
That's where I'm trying to get to, is having some brown medicine here, some brown water medicine. But I'd like to talk to you today about that career, and again, paying honor and tribute where it's due. Let me be the first to shoot a toast to my father-in-law, the Captain Mark Olesen, or as in the Marine Corps we'd say Colonel. But we'll call you Captain today since you're in charge. So salute to you, Grandma, and all those who have served like you and those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. We salute you. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
So, Grandpa, let's go back to the early days. The young man in Wisconsin, right? That's where you grew up, right?
Right.
What part of Wisconsin?
Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee. What was the inspiration that led you to be a physician in the U.S. Navy? Can you start us back there and kind of walk us through it?
Sure, absolutely. So I think there were a couple of life events that kind of bent my personal twig towards medicine. The first was that my older sister had a severe bout of encephalitis, a viral brain infection, when she was 6 years old, and left her profoundly impaired mentally. In those days, we called it retarded. We don't use that terminology anymore. But
unless you're Lizzie, and
Yeah.
Lizzie will say words. But anyways.
But she was left basically in almost a vegetative state. She needed constant care and was eventually institutionalized for the balance of her life till she died in her early 50s. And seeing that experience and how medicine at the time was unable to really help her in a way that they could even a few years or decades later with steroids and more aggressive treatment. So that was one event, and then the other was my father died when I was 12. He was born with a congenital abnormality, a weakness in the circulation in his brain, a brain aneurysm, which blew out when he was 41 years old. And again, the technology for treating or identifying and successfully treating that was just not there. So compared to had he had that 10 or 20 years later, he could have well survived and been just fine. So those two life-changing events, I think, really made me think in the back of my own mind about wanting to help others and prevent these kind of tragedies in other people's lives. So I remember very distinctly that early on I had an interest in medicine. As a seventh grade, sorry about that.
All right.
A seventh grade writing assignment in English, we had to write our autobiography, which to me is crazy. What does a 12-year-old have to talk about? But one of the elements was what your future plans were, and even way back then at that tender age, I said I wanted to be a physician.
Wow.
So that being said, I was encouraged after my father died and my mom moved closer to her family in southeastern Minnesota when I was in high school. And so went from a big city, Milwaukee, to a small town of 2,500, a little town called Spring Valley in southeastern Minnesota. And there I met a family physician who really was Dr. Snyder, who was an inspiration to me. I just admired what he did for my family and for the rest of the community, and everybody knew him, everybody loved him. And so he was kind of a mentor and a role model for me. And he encouraged me to consider medicine and suggested, obviously starting college with pre-med, see if it looks like it's the right path for your life. And he gave me a sound piece of advice that I've used for not only my practice or pursuit of a career in medicine, but also just life in general. He said, when I expressed a concern to him about the long journey ahead to become a physician, he said, well, don't look at it that way. He said, look at it as a series of steps. Take it one day, 1 quarter of college. Take it in smaller increments.
Yeah.
And decide as you reevaluate as you go along that path, is it the right career path for me? And so I've tried to apply that approach not only in my professional pursuits, but also in my life. Is this next step taking me where I want to be, and doing that constant reassessment?
Wow.
So anyways, my mom obviously was of modest means, being a widow financially. And so I knew I was on my own for funding college and any other education. So I went to a state school back in Wisconsin, and it was cheap in those days. I was just thinking about preparing for this, that it was maybe $400 a quarter for tuition.
What?
Yeah.
$400?
Right.
You're aging yourself.
Yes, I am.
Inflation adjusted today,
Yeah.
college tuition, university costs today, it's been one of the, we talk about inflation over the last 100 years being like 3.15%, but university expense, college expense in the United States has been one of the greatest increases in costs, bar none. 3,000 or 4,000%.
400 is the cost of a book today.
Yeah, $400. That Jacob, mysterious Jake out of nowhere speaks. Jake, see what the inflation rate, what year did you enter college?
76.
So from 1976 to current, what the university inflation rate, you can typically pull it out. Google will tell us that inflation cost. So anyways, $400 a quarter, $1,600 a year.
Right. And then it was probably another $1,400 or so for room and board. I lived in the dorms, and of course you got your meals through the meal plan and so forth. But so maybe $2,800 to $3,000 a year, which I could swing between working part-time in high school and then in college, and then my summer income from summer jobs. So was able to self-fund the college years, but facing medical school, and even in those days, tuition was in the tens of thousands of dollars per year.
Yeah, Jake found this, Mark. So this is $400 a quarter.
Okay.
From 1976 to 2023. American Institute of Economic Research. So this is just the cost of living calculator.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's grabbing all of inflation. I was looking specifically for college tuition cost, Jake. But this is interesting. Change that to $1,600. So the annual cost of college, just inflation adjusted, would mean that it would only be about $3,000 a year today for university costs from 1973 to 2023.
Oh.
However, the interesting thing here is that was my point, is that the cost for...
Sorry, I readjusted that. It's 76, which was when you graduated, right, Grandpa?
From high school, and that's when I started college.
College. So from the time that he started college to today, if it was $1,600 in inflation adjusted, that'd be the same as $8,500 a year for... and what university did you go to?
University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So.
Okay. So state school?
Yeah.
I mean, state school, Virginia Tech today, I think is closer to like $40,000 a year, right?
Oh, my Lord.
So just that alone and that expense. And back then, basically what you're saying is Mrs. Olesen couldn't afford to put you through school.
Right. Yeah, and she made that clear early on to not only to me, to my two siblings, and they put themselves through school too. But once I was accepted to medical school and started to look at the expenses, which went up dramatically in terms of tuition, I said, there's no way I can work my way through med school the way I did through college. So I basically was faced with two options: is either apply to either the public health service for a financial sponsorship or one of the military services, or go into debt. And so I figured I'd always have time, but I wasn't sure I'd have the money to pay back a loan.
Yeah.
So I applied to all three services for sponsorship. They all had, it's called the Health Professions Scholarship Program, which is basically one of the services, if you meet their requirements, the physical requirements, so forth, you can sign up, and you're an inactive reservist during med school. They pay you a modest stipend and pay your expenses like tuition.
Okay.
And
those programs still exist today. Yeah.
And then you owe them year for year. So a full 4 years of med school would be 4 years of obligated service that you pay back as a physician once you graduate. So I applied to all three uniformed services that had the program, Army, Navy, and Air Force. Was accepted to two, the Army and the Air Force, the Army and the Navy. Air Force disqualified me because of a heart murmur. But anyways, because of that, I had to make a decision about which service I wanted to go with. And I think because my dad had been in the Navy, he was a machinist mate during the Korean conflict.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't a career for him, but he had good experience in the Navy and told a lot of positive stories about it. I said, well, I'll go Navy, thinking full well it would be a 4 year, or actually 8 years, 4 years as an inactive reservist while in med school, and then pay back my 4 years of service, obligated service, and then I'd be done. But
then you would go into public practice and
right.
Work in a public hospital. Okay.
Either
that was the
or
mindset.
private practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Private practice.
So basically pay back the loan in terms of time, not money, and then go on with the rest of my life. But
okay.
One thing led to another, and before I knew it, 4 years of obligated service became 29 years of uniform service.
So there's a lot in between to kind of peel that onion back from 29 years of, man, you woke up one day and was like, wait a minute, how did I get here?
Right, that's exactly the way it was.
And then met my future mother-in-law, and man, there's a lot in there to peel back. So what I heard, and this is, things that I talk to with business owners a lot and entrepreneurs, that the thing that struck me most in what you said, Mark, is there was some tragedy that hit your family. Emily, your little sister having a living death, and I never got to meet her personally, but knew the story. She was still living when we met you. And she only passed about 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
A little bit longer. It was about 20 years ago. So
it's your little sister. Has it been that long since she passed?
My older sister, yeah.
Your older sister?
Yeah, I was at Bethesda at the time. So
oh yeah, that's right. She was in Bethesda when that's right, man. So but she lived a long time with the illness.
I have to say, kudos to the state of Wisconsin. They had an excellent state program with these state facilities, and then she transitioned to a group home, and she got great care there as well. So the state does a very, very good job of taking care of folks like Janet.
Yeah.
And so she was in the best of health physically until she ultimately succumbed from pneumonia. But she got the greatest of care, no bed sores, no signs of neglect. Anytime I would see her, she was always clean and very well cared for, and always been thankful for that.
Yeah. Well, awesome. She's in heaven now, so that's awesome.
Yeah, with Jesus.
With your father, too, and you lost
Right.
your father young. So in that tragedy, what stands out to me is many times is that human beings do one of two things with tragedy. They either let it continue to take them down a road of despair, misery, and failure for many people, like especially in business, where others will go, I'm not going to let that define me. I'm not going to let that define my family. And the admiration that I have for you is that you took something that was very tragic and spun it into something as positive as you could, and saying, hey, I'm going to take a Hippocratic oath to try to help my family, not let this happen to someone else's family in the future, that if there's something you can do to give back or pay back or even help be a part of seeing a person recover, that's what I saw in you. And so that's really awesome and cool that you took something that really would have taken most families out.
Thank you.
You overcame and excelled in spite of the bad news, in spite of the bad circumstance. And your mother too. What
an inspiration she's been to me personally.
And that's really cool too. Mrs. Olesen today is how young a lady?
She will be 95 her next birthday, and she's going great guns. She's obviously retired, but I think she's one of those folks who's busier in retirement than she ever was when she was working. That she lives in basically a co-op for older folks, and she's active. She's on the finance committee and a bunch of other stuff. And
shout out this morning to Sylvia, Grandma Sylvia. So
she's doing great.
Awesome woman. And this lady, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this about her. She will put you to shame when it comes to birthdays.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
have a problem remembering birthdays, and Kathleen can identify and concur. Sylvia has never, ever, ever, to my knowledge, missed anyone in her family's birthday with a birthday card and usually, telling on you, Grandma Sylvia, a $5 bill.
Yeah.
Now, we have a conspiracy that we think Grandma Sylvia prints these in her basement, but we won't tell.
Yeah.
You've never seen a crisper $5 bill.
The $5 bills are so crisp,
Yeah.
but it is so warming and touching. I know when everybody else forgets my birthday, Grandma Sylvia, and again, you know, from a family perspective, I mean, you came into our life, my children's lives, in my 20s. And Grandma Sylvia accepted my kids like they were her own grandchildren by blood, and it's been awesome and great, and that's a testament to your family. But she's never missed a birthday. So,
Yeah.
we got a lot to live up to there with Grandma Sylvia. So shout out to you today.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be
Hey,
about
Mom.
you, Mark, but just wanted to give that shout out to your mom.
More than happy to give her the
What's that?
credit due.
We couldn't hear you, Grandma.
She pushed him along the way.
That's
Yeah.
right. Now you can't start crying on us today. No. So that's why we wouldn't put you on camera. We would get us all crying, Grandma. But yeah, super woman. So you graduate from University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. You get commissioned there, right?
Right.
So after the commission, you still have to pass medical school, right?
Right. So you're an inactive reservist. I was an ensign, and then you'd go on active duty for a couple of weeks every summer if your school schedule permitted it. So, but then and wore the uniform. My first active duty tour, they sent me to what was called then in those days Officer Indoctrination School. Now it's Officer Development School, I think they call it. But basically, it was informally referred to as Knife and Fork School. They taught you. This is for the staff corps officers, doctors, chaplains, lawyers, nurses, people who didn't come up through either, the Naval Academy or ROTC, but they taught you how to wear the uniform and how to salute and basically to be an officer.
You got to put your mic up there.
And which fork to use at dinner.
Right, that's why they call it Knife and Fork School.
Knife and fork. So from outside to inside, right? Is that the yeah.
Right.
From left
That's
to right.
exactly right. So, anyways, that was my first tour.
Is that where you met your first Marine?
Yes. We had a Marine
Semper Fi.
who was a staff sergeant, as I recall, who was tasked with trying to teach us doctors and nurses how to march. And you'd see the bemused smile on his face and the shake of his head when he'd I'm sure thinking to himself, I can't get this bunch of bozos to ever march, at least up to Marine Corps standards. So
Right.
I guess we did it good enough to satisfy the Navy. So
That's fine. And you would work on things like Irish pennants and make sure that your
Right.
uniforms are crisp and squared away.
right, and then we had some classes in the types of ships and naval traditions and all that sort of thing to kind of introduce us.
Do they ever
So-
let doctors shoot guns? Did you get to shoot anything?
No, in fact, when I went to combat casualty care, in those days you got a plastic M16 rifle, and so you did a fake charge at the hill, but you went bang, 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 bang. And the reason I did that is a couple of classes earlier, they were using real M16s, obviously with blanks, but one of my colleagues in that earlier class grabbed the barrel of her M16 after firing a number of rounds and
Torched her hand?
yeah, exactly. So I decided it was too dangerous to give
Oh, boy.
doctors and nurses real weapons, even with, blank ammo. So
Yeah, the investment they're making in those hands.
That's
they
right.
probably don't want third-degree burns.
that's right. You don't want to
barrels,
risk
right.
that. So
So med school, you make it through that NDOC program, the fork and knife program.
right.
Any funny stories there? Anything you want to share on that front?
It was one of
Anything
those
stands
things.
out?
I was glad it was over. It really did feel like yeoman work. I mean, a ton of study, a ton of hours once you're in your clinical rotations. You learn a lot, but it's really drinking from a fire hose in terms of just the physical demands, the mental demands, and the fact that you're in the short white coat. You're the medical student.
Right.
You could be as sharp as a tack. I'm not claiming that I was, but had some colleagues or classmates who were absolutely brilliant people. But as long as you're wearing that short white coat, you're the medical student, low man or woman on the totem pole. So I was ready for that to be over.
How many years of med school do you have to do to become a physician?
In mine, I was in a 4-year school. Now, some will go year-round, and they will do 3. I was off this summers between my freshman and sophomore years, and then went straight through from September of my junior year till graduation in May of my senior year.
At what point in med school do you pick a specialty where you go, I'm going to
Well-
specialize in X?
Some people know from the very outset exactly what they want to do and they pursue that. Others, like me, were not quite certain, but it worked out very well for me in that regard, in that the Navy wants, and all the services do this, is they want to train you as a generalist because they expect that between your internship, once you complete your training and are able to be licensed, and the time that you specialize, you'll go out with the operational forces. So they want you well versed in, all the specialties. And so I applied. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in med school. I thought I'd wanted to be a family physician like Doc Snyder, the one I mentioned from my adolescence, but I wasn't sure. So they require you to do this transitional internship to get that background in many different specialties. So I did that at Naval Hospital Oakland, a nice facility, which is no longer there, was closed under basic realignment and closure. But got a broad basis of training and experience in all kinds of operationally related specialties: primary care, orthopedics, general surgery, OBGYN. So I felt when I finished my internship that I was well prepared to go wherever the Navy would send me for that operational tour, which turned out to be the USS Enterprise, which was
So you got to do your aircraft carrier tour,
Yeah.
huh?
It
Did
was-
you do a med cruise or?
we did a Westpac, a Western
Westpac.
Pacific cruise.
Okay.
So in fact, I met the ship in the Philippines after I finished my internship in July, and finished out the rest of that.
Any Philippine stories you want to tell?
None for the public, but actually, I love the Filipino people and the Filipino food. I'm not interested in some of the other recreational activities that some of my shipmates availed themselves of, but
No donkey programs or anything?
and none of that. But I learned to love, what do they call that stuff? The Filipino egg rolls.
Oh, God, I don't cannot. Jake, you're going to have to fact check us. Filipino egg rolls, what are they called?
Yes,
Lumpia.
that's what it is.
There you go.
Thank you, Paula. Learned to love lumpia in the Philippines, though. But speaking of that tour, one of the high points, still to this day, of my memories of the military is when the ship was coming back in. It was home ported in Alameda, California. One of the traditions in the Navy is when a ship returns from a cruise, an extended cruise, they have it's called manning the rail, where officers and enlisted sailors will get in their dress uniforms appropriate for the time of year. In this case, we were in blues, and they man the perimeter of the ship. In our case, the flight deck, and stand
Excuse
there
me,
at attention.
Mark. While you're telling that story, Jacob, will you do USS Enterprise manning the rails and pull up images? And I think we can probably pull one up of showing what you're talking about here.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Now we're going to cry.
I may. So anyways, we were manning the rail, coming under the Golden Gate Bridge, and family members who were going to meet the ship in Alameda had driven up there, and they had big banners and welcome home and all that. And then on the ship's loudspeakers, they started to play Lee Greenwood's "Proud to be an American"
Oh, wow.
over the loudspeakers. And I tell you that, there we go. Yep.
Are you in whites or?
We were in blues because it was December.
In December, okay.
In fact, I was very thankful. We had a warrant officer, PA, who let me borrow his pea coat because it was cold. December,
coming through the Golden Gate,
Golden Gate, and the wind
wind
whipping
blowing
around
off
you.
the water.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But hearing that ship and the cheers coming from the sailors and then the people up on the bridge, one of the proudest moments of my naval career was that experience.
Wow. That's got to be awesome.
Oh,
Is there a picture, Jake? Why don't you try to find USS Enterprise manning the rail and then put Golden Gate Bridge? I bet there's a picture of that. Noah, your grandson, just went through the Golden Gate yesterday. Or
Oh,
day before
really?
yesterday. He's on his
Small
way
world.
to Alaska.
Oh,
So, yeah, what an amazing picture.
mm-hmm.
And how awe-inspiring to see the USS Enterprise, like coming through.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what year that would have been, Grandpa?
That would have been December of 1984. December 20th, as I recall. Because it was literally right before Christmas. And, pardon me.
So you did a 6-month pump, is that?
Right.
And you went on a Westpac. Any activity to speak of? 1984. I'm trying to think. Beirut bombing had happened in '83.
Right.
Anything exciting happened on your first cruise?
Well, I think the main thing, from an operational standpoint, it was thankfully pretty quiet. But for me professionally, it was what a great period of professional development and personal development as a physician. When you're in med school and even as an intern, there's always somebody looking over your shoulder, checking your work. More senior physician,
right.
You were under supervision. But then you get out with the operational forces. Yeah, I had other physicians with me. I had a senior medical officer, and then flight surgeons along with me, and of course this great PA. But in terms of experience in the operational setting, like my senior medical officer was a OBGYN by training who got a midlife crisis, and at 40 he rejoined the Navy.
Oh,
but
wow.
his practice had been all in female care, and in those days we didn't have any women on the ship, so
He's a little out of pocket there. Huh?
So he was a good leader and a good administrator, but in terms of professional guidance and oversight, his level of training in primary care was about the same as mine, as was the flight surgeon. So what I'm saying is I had to grow up professionally. I didn't have anybody to fall back on.
Gotcha.
I obviously could consult with my colleagues, but their level of knowledge and experience was similar to mine. So I was very thankful I had the foresight to bring a bunch of my medical techs with me, to serve as a reference, because there was no internet in those days, and we wouldn't have had connectivity anyway. So you were faced with a problem. You either had to have the knowledge in your head or in your books. And I think one of the most challenging but rewarding experiences we had call or duty on a rotational basis on one of my days of duty. It turned out that we got a radio call from one of the small ships in our carrier group. They had a warrant officer who had experienced what appeared to be a heart attack. And, of course, they didn't have the facilities to take care of him. So he was airlifted to us and became my patient. And like many acute heart attack patients, his first 24 hours he had a lot of abnormal heart rhythms. And so I had to give him medication to control that, obviously, or it could be a fatal event if he had continued bout of ventricular tachycardia. Well, what we had to do is do it kind of the old school way. We didn't have the IVAC machines that very precisely monitor the number of drips, where you can very carefully control the amount of dose you give. It was basically by my corpsman counting the drops.
Oh, wow.
And then watching the monitor. I'm sorry, I keep knocking things.
That's all right.
We did have a continuous cardiac monitor, an EKG, so we'd watch that, make sure he went back to normal rhythm, but then observe him closely for signs of toxicity, shakiness from too much of the medication.
And what's the med you typically would give someone like that?
It's an antiarrhythmic. I'm trying to remember the specific one we gave, but there was a number of medicines you give to slow the heart rate, but they can have side effects, one of which you can actually put patients in seizures if you give them too much of it.
And you bottom out their heart rate, and
right.
blood pressure drops out, right?
Right. So it can, too little is bad, too much can be bad.
Yeah.
So I spent the night basically in my office. I had a pull-down rack, so I didn't go even back to my stateroom, which was one level below, and didn't sleep much that night. But we got him through that first 12 hours, and then within 36 hours, we were slated to be in port. So we brought him, and then obviously sent him to the local hospital. I think it was Subic Bay, so we went to the Naval Hospital there. But we got him through, and he eventually recovered, thankfully. But that was
one of your first experiences, the trauma.
Right, of being. And then speaking of trauma, we did have an event where it was an unfortunate event where one of the corpsmen who worked on the flight deck, they work long hours, and he fell asleep, and basically his legs were cut off when he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a
steam line, the
aircraft ran across him. And so fortunately we had good surgical and anesthesia care, and we were close enough they could get medevac him off the ship very quickly after he was stabilized, but pretty traumatic for everybody involved.
Lost both of his legs.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or, they were so badly damaged, I think they both ended up being amputated.
Amputated. Wow. So that's 1984.
Yeah.
6-month cruise. When you get over around the Philippines, I got to ask some silly stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
How many Marines did you have to punch the bore and deal with their wild escapades in the Philippines? And
well, it's funny. Whenever we went to port, but especially the Philippines, we had 2 different sick call lines. We had one for just the regular sick call, cough, colds, stomach upset. And then we had a separate one run by our preventive medicine techs, the VD sick call. And they both average about 200 visits a day for the first 3 days, after each port visit, but particularly after both visits to the Philippines. So,
oh, geez. I've heard stories.
Yeah. And I tell you, a lot of guys didn't realize that, because gonorrhea is so prevalent over there, or at least it was in those days, and so many people had been treated for it that the strains of gonorrhea were becoming resistant to many antibiotics.
Oh, boy.
So, you get it here in the United States, at least in those days, it was a shot of penicillin and you were fine. But there, a lot of guys ended up getting 2 and 3 different courses of treatment because they had contracted one of those resistant strains. And one fellow, I recall, eventually got a severe infection in the flush of his genitals himself, and basically the surgeon had to lance the infection, and
took a little off, huh?
Yeah, it was a pretty nasty. It was a major procedure, and I'm not sure the equipment worked nearly as well afterwards. So, so that was a shame. But yeah, that was a big problem.
Wow. So advancing through your career now, you decided early in your career to specialize. And correct me if I get this wrong. I'm sure you'll smack me if I do here, but occupational medicine is where you focused your career.
Right. And again, I'm sorry about my vision. I have bad vision, and so I keep hitting
That's all right.
As part of my job on the ship, you have your regular duties taking care of patients, but then you also have the additional duties, or collateral duties, we called them. And so one day my senior medical officer, Captain Mark, said, "Lieutenant Olesen, I have an opportunity for you to excel." I said, "Yes, sir. What is that?" He said, "You're now our hearing conservation officer, program officer." I said, "Well, sir, what's the hearing conservation program?" So he said, "Well, there's a new instruction that just came out, or a new directive." So he hands me what literally looked like a phone book. And he said, "Here's the instruction." And then he gave me a petty officer to help manage the program. So we had to identify the sailors who were at particular risk of where they worked, they had a lot of noise exposure, to help issue them hearing protection, do periodic hearing tests to make sure their hearing wasn't being damaged, and then monitor them for their period of time on the ship. So that got me interested in the whole idea of the identification and prevention of work-related injuries and illness, which is essentially the elements, the cornerstone, that's what occupational medicine is.
Okay.
So after that experience, I decided I wanted to do that, so I applied to be trained. The Navy will train you in a number of different specialties. You obviously have to be selected. Very similar to what our counterparts in the civilian sector do. They apply to residencies, and then if they're selected, they go into the training program. So, and of course, the Navy adds the proviso that if they train you as a specialist, you owe them additional time. So for every year of training, you require an additional year of obligation.
Okay.
So I incurred that 3-year obligation, and then went to the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda, Maryland, to get the training. And so, again, a great experience. I learned a lot. And in this, compared to med school where you're kind of exposed to everything, this was focused in on the area I knew I wanted to practice ultimately. So enjoyed every rotation, enjoyed all the academic work. As part of the training, I got a Master's of Public Health at that university. And so a lot of academic work, schoolwork, and that was a bit of an adjustment. I had been out of med school like 6, 7 years, and to get back into the student mode took a little bit, but it was good. And so really enjoyed that, and then embarked, once I finished, on my first practice was right there in the greater Bethesda area. I was at Indian Head, Maryland, just south of Washington, D.C., where there's a naval ordnance station, a weapons station. So
Yeah.
I ran the occupational medicine program there, and then at Bethesda itself. And then had a series of assignments within occupational medicine as I progressed through my career, ultimately leading to my being assigned to the Naval Environmental Health Center, where I met my lovely bride. She was working there at the time, or came to work with us there.
Grandma.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah.
All right, you're skipping some stuff, though, so I'm going to take you back a little bit.
Okay.
So 1984, jump into the 1990s, and that's a period of time when I was in the Marine Corps. And I like to tell folks that I was in during a time of peace, relative peace. The 1990s, other than a little bit Grenada coming off of
Right.
things going on in the Middle East and Beirut Marine Corps bombing in 1983, Somalia, Grenada, those type things were popping off around the world, but no real big issue. The Cold War was still
Right. And we did have
alive and well.
Saddam Hussein's incursion into Kuwait. So we had the
Right.
first Gulf War in 91.
Right. So which is where I was going. So you were in the Gulf.
No,
Did you-
I raised my hand to volunteer to go, and because I was in training.
But I mean, you were active duty during the Gulf War.
Right. So I was in training there at the Uniformed Services University, and like all my classmates raised their hand, but as you recall, thankfully it was a very short offensive effort of like 100 hours that they so
Norman.
I was never called up for the first Gulf War, although I was more than ready to go. But that was a reminder that, yes, we're in a peacetime environment, but things could heat up very quickly at a moment's notice or in very short order. So that you always had to be ready, mentally, physically. You might be called upon to go to an operational setting.
So you were pretty deep into your career. 16 years from that date of 84, 9/11 happens. 16-ish years.
Right.
Where were you, and what was your rank? I don't remember.
I was a commander, or I had just made captain, and so I was at. When that happened, I was at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth. I was in a senior leadership position. I was director of health, safety, and environmental services. So basically overseeing those occupational medicine services and some other related services throughout the Tidewater region.
Okay.
Worked for Admiral Balsam, great lady. And so the war came up, and of course we sent people, to support those operational endeavors in the theater. A lot of our folks ended up going with the Marines out of 2nd Marine Division, 2MEF, down in Lejeune, augmenting their own embedded medical personnel. And so sometimes you had to pick people to go into harm's way, and that was, again, my responsibility, or one of my responsibilities, but a challenge, because you knew you were sending people into danger, and potentially they might not come back. And so it I wouldn't say it weighed on my mind, but it was always in the back of my mind that these people are stepping forward to defend our nation.
Senior leadership, you are putting young men, young women sometimes in harm's way by the stroke of a pen or an executive order. So during that period, You were in this executive position, and where I want to get to and spend some time today is an impact that was on my life that really stands out to me. And I know I'm skipping a few things in your naval career and distinguished naval career, but for the sake of time and talking through this, you got a position as the XO of National Naval Medical Center.
Yes.
And you became the XO during the Gulf War.
Yes.
Or now we refer to as GWAT, the Global War on Terror.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that position because there was something specific that was going on with Bethesda and Walter Reed. You were getting the seriously wounded, long-term treatment of Marines, soldiers, sailors.
Right. So in those days, basically Walter Reed Army Medical Center was still open, as was National Naval Medical Center.
Right across the street.
Practically.
Yeah. Practically, yeah.
And then there was the Burn Center down in San Antonio. And so for all the services, if you had a severely burned casualty, he or she would go to San Antonio, but otherwise they'd go either to Bethesda or to Walter Reed. Now, obviously, the majority of injured soldiers went to Walter Reed. The injured sailors and Marines went to Bethesda. A little bit of overlap, but we got a number of the most severely injured. Mm-hmm. They would typically come from theater after initial stabilization, go through Landstuhl, Germany, for further stabilization and perhaps a little bit of definitive care, but then they would come back stateside and they'd go through their long-term care, rehabilitation, all that sort of thing at facilities like National Naval Medical Center. And so we got a lot of casualties, and what one period that particularly stuck out of my mind is I think it was the fall of 2007 after the second Fallujah offensive when the U.S. went back in to retake Fallujah. And obviously there were a number of, it was a bloody battle and there were a lot of casualties. And how proud I was of the men and women working at all the military facilities, but particularly mine, that these, severely injured casualty caseloads, like in the hundreds, in addition to all the other regular inpatients who were either less severely injured sailors and Marines, or just people coming in to have their babies, to get their appendix out, all that sort of thing. So they were working just some tremendous hours, and how the staff pulled together and helped out. It reminded me a lot of what we heard about coming up here about the hurricane, how wards who were not part of the typical post-surgical treatment, they would send staff over to help, and the folks would jump right in. They weren't surgery techs or 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 post-op nurses, but they learned quickly and they just jumped right in and did what they needed to do. And it was just so heartening to see that kind of teamwork and camaraderie and pulling together.
So I bring that up because I remember some conversations I had with you years ago, and there was a particular time I want to talk about that we were visiting you and Paula in Bethesda, and you took me on a tour of the hospital. Mm-hmm. And I think specifically it was either the 6th floor.
Mm-hmm. Good remembering. Yeah, that was a post-op ward.
Post-op ward of these young Marines. Being a Marine myself, the impact that had on me of seeing these young lance corporals most of the time that were recovering from serious trauma and wounds, and a lot of them head trauma. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of the things you said to me is that had this been like a World War II conflict, most of these Marines and sailors, soldiers would have died on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. But because of the advancement of training and technology from the corpsman all the way to triage, that we were bringing guys back home alive.
Right.
Can you talk about that in medicine? What happened during that period that we just got better at battlefield medicine?
Well, I think the biggest difference of Gulf War treatment compared to Vietnam or before was much more aggressive treatment right on the battlefield and at the first level of care beyond that, the field hospitals. That in the old days, it was basically you'd slap in an IV, slap on a bandage, whisk them through that first level of treatment, and then move them back to a safe area where a definitive hospital, and yes, we've all seen the MASH, where they did some operative work up front, closer to the front, but the majority of it was still being done at these fixed facilities well away from the front lines. Well, in contrast, starting in Vietnam and particularly in the first and then the second Gulf War was much more aggressive treatment, having surgeons right there
Embedded
in the operational units, and then having this first echelon being much more aggressive in first level care, surgical care in particular, in addition to the resuscitation with fluids and plasma and that sort of thing.
Giving the corpsman, like the enlisted guy, a little more freedom to triage is my understanding, right? So
that was a big part of it,
They weren't
too.
surgeons, but they were doing some pretty damn close.
They got much more treatment in treating severe trauma in particular.
Yeah.
So, and of course, they were given more tools to do that, more IVs, types of IVs, and so things that, and then narcotics and other things that they could give, and then pressors to help raise blood pressure. They were given more tools in their toolbox, and then also more training to know how to use them effectively. So they're able to do much more right at the time of injury than a generation or two before, and that made a huge difference in terms of long-term survivability.
So, and I draw this out, and what I glean from it is that guys come home, so there's not a high mortality rate, but there's a high morbidity rate, where guys are living with lifelong injuries. And so being on that sixth floor, I remember one Lance Corporal in particular who just got his Purple Heart from I think maybe General Pace had come through.
Could well be.
And I served with General Pace, which was kind of cool. Because I think he was there that particular day. And but I saw this one young Marine, and the vivid picture I still have in my mind today is that half of his skull was gone, and he's still alive. He's a vegetable, and he's, there's, I guess, left side of the skull controls what the right side of the body. And so there was some real issues that this young man's going to deal with. But for his family and for his spouse, they wanted him alive. They wanted, to be there with him and to experience life with him again, even in a state that doesn't look great. But it was meaningful for that family and for that young man to be with them. Are there any stories for you in particular that stick out during that period of seeing young men or young women come through with injuries or?
Well, one in particular, it was one of the, we had a number of VIP visits, folks coming, senior leaders coming to see the casualties and to express their concern and support for them and their families. And one that really sticks out in my mind is when President Bush, George W. Bush, came after that second Fallujah offensive. And he was there in part for his annual physical, but then after the physical, he said he would see any casualty and family who would like to see him. So he ended up seeing almost 100 at that time.
Wow.
And he came in to see the mother and then a severely injured Marine, very similar to the one you had mentioned, who had been left profoundly impaired mentally because of a head injury. And the president asked the mother, is there anything I can do for you, as he asked all the other families. And she said, and I could tell this really touched him so deeply, she said, you can give me my son back, knowing full well that was not in the president's power, but just how profoundly it touched him. And I had always and still admire him to this day, but I could see how personally he took that mother's plea and how it touched him, and he then did have his staff follow up and see what they could do, and got him placed closer to home and so forth. But just how much he cared and how much it weighed on his heart about sending, like you said earlier, these young men and women into harm's way.
Yeah.
So
I'm guessing this picture then is probably that day.
it actually was the next year when he came for his physical.
Oh, okay.
But he came regularly, and I always got to see him when he was here and express my admiration for him and what he was doing. So
He's smiling at you in this picture, so I'm guessing you didn't give him his procto exam on that day, right? So
again, that medical confidentiality, but you're right on that count. It was not me.
So, serving in Bethesda, you and Paula both served up there. How many years? I forget that you served there.
2 years.
2 years there. And then you got an opportunity to, was that when you got to go to Lejeune?
Yeah. And the great honor of commanding Naval Hospital Camp Lejeune for the 2 years after I had been deputy commander or XO at Bethesda. And
Hang out with some jarheads.
yeah, what a great experience. And
Yeah, now they really admired you down there in Lejeune and the hospital, and I've seen many pictures of Mark. I don't know if we have any, Jake, of Mark on his Harley bicycle.
I'll see if I can find some.
They might be out there on Facebook.
they might
But
be.
you were known to be a little eccentric for a naval officer, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. So
A tattoo of all things. You
Yeah.
got not many naval officers. You pull your sleeve up there if you would on your. I think it's on your right. Yeah. So you got the eagle there.
yeah,
Born to Ride, Harley Davidson.
yeah.
Not many naval officers
Now,
sporting tats. Well, today tats are really popular, but you did it at a time.
where it wasn't nearly as common.
Yeah. Any admirals give you any?
Well,
brief over it?
my XO at the time, I was at the Naval Environmental Health Center, and he said, "Keep that covered up." So,
So you did. I mean, your naval dress, like your whites there, will cover
right,
the tat, right?
right.
Yeah.
It would take a conscious effort, like I just did, to show it.
Right.
It didn't naturally reveal itself. So, but yeah, that was a great tour. Had a great team down there, and like you said, it's really where the rubber meets the road. Why we were in naval medicine is to support the operational forces, the sailors on the ships and the Marines in garrison getting ready to deploy, and they were always in a deployment cycle.
Right.
Either getting back, getting ready for, or in deployment. So, as you well know from your own experience.
So anything in that period of time leading up to your command of the hospital in Jacksonville, I skipped a few periods there to kind of talk about the GWAT and talk about what really stood out in my mind at Naval Hospital Bethesda, which now Bethesda and Walter Reed kind of combine, right? It's all
Right. It's National Military Medical Center, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. So the Army Walter Reed closed, and then they upgraded and expanded.
and it's like a joint forces
Right.
medical command.
And Mark played a big leadership role in making that happen.
Yep, that's what I was trying to drag out of him over
All
here.
right.
That's
Well, that's right. That was, during one of the base realignment and closure decisions, the commission, I think, made the right decision. As you said, we've got these two tertiary care medical centers within a couple of miles of each other. Why are we maintaining two when we can combine them? But you talk about a clash of cultures or differences in cultures that we all know their services all have their own specific way of doing business.
right.
And so to try to bring those together and, some of those initial meetings between the senior Army and senior Naval folks to operationalize or figure out how to make Congress said you are going to combine these two.
And didn't you say that Army was arm wrestling for what it's going to be called, and they won.
Yes. Because if you look at the business literature, and I did have the great opportunity to attend the Naval Postgraduate School and get my MBA just before that, when you look at merging two companies, particularly two companies that are roughly equal peers, all the research suggests you pick a new name different from the two combining facilities to show that you're a new entity.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if one big company absorbs a smaller one, the smaller one gets sucked in and it become Acme Inc.
Right.
Plus. So I brought that up in one of our early meetings when the Army was pushing the idea of calling this new combined facility Walter Reed, that this is what the literature said. You'd think somebody dropped a turd in the punch bowl. That it was not well received.
They're like, Olsen, stand down.
So I went back and talked to my admiral about it, and of course this was one small piece of a much larger assembly of a puzzle. He said, "Let it go." He said, "We're not going to win this one," and so, but I think we ended up with a lot of hard work, to use an Army term, nug work or detail work.
Yeah.
Went in on both sides and along with the Air Force, because they were combining major elements of their Washington, D.C. facility there too, into a facility that, from all I hear now, works quite well as a joint command. So I'd like to think we had a small part in establishing that foundation to allow that to happen.
Yeah. So is there a tour or a command that stands out for you where you're like, man, if I could have been in this job my entire career, could you have picked one?
Well, the great thing about it is every tour had its own challenges and opportunities and rewards, and I had such a varied experience over time. So, but I think one that stands out in terms of achieving a lifelong dream is after I finished that tour at Bethesda or at Camp Lejeune, I was selected to be Deputy Medical Officer of the Marine Corps to go to the Pentagon, which is a post-command tour for a lot of us. But in that capacity, I got to wear the Navy version of the Marine Corps uniform.
I remember, yeah.
Which
You look sharp in that.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Those Charlies, yeah.
I had
Deltas.
Yeah.
Right.
I had always wanted to be with Marines. In fact, you fill out, when you're an intern, you fill out what we call a wish list of where you want to do your operational tour. So I listed every single Marine Corps unit I could think of, and then put at the end, I'll take a ship. And of course I got a ship. But that had been a dream of mine. So that post-command tour gave me the opportunity to do that. And again, work with some great people. Now, being a staff officer at the Pentagon is sometimes thankless work, but doing it wearing a Marine Corps uniform made it a whole lot better. So
it's awesome. The Marines do have some pretty amazing uniforms, right?
Yeah, they do.
Just the culture around the Marine Corps is being a Marine, and then hanging out with sailors and soldiers and coasties, airmen. I'm still super proud of being a Marine. So
yeah, and well, you should be.
But this is not about me today. No, this is about our sailors. So Mark, when you got to your last command, kind of sometimes referred to as the Twilight Tour, did your last command really feel that way for you?
Yeah, I think it was after, I did that tour at headquarters of Marine Corps because of my medical condition. I knew I was not going to make flag, and I don't blame the leadership for not choosing me because of that. That was
kind of shitty, though. We were all hoping for you to throw that star on.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think had I not had this eye condition, which is really significantly impairing my vision even back then, I may well have made flag. But anyway, so I knew I was...
He was on the short list, which is a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. No, I was clearly being groomed until this diagnosis came up. So I was I knew I was transitioning to civilian life, so I wanted to get closer to our home. We had built our retirement home down in North Carolina where we live today.
Beautiful.
Yes, thank you. And Paula was living there full time. And so I took a tour, an occupational medicine tour at the Navy Environmental and Preventive Medicine Unit number 2, which was in Norfolk, and stayed on base during the week, came home on the weekends. Noah was my driver, and my grandson, and he was a great one. And so I knew I was transitioning. So I was, putting out my resume and obviously doing my day-to-day work at the unit. But my focus started to be, life after wearing the uniform. So
yeah. And life after the uniform stayed serving soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, because you became a physician with the Veterans Administration.
Right.
And what I was really proud of for you is that you turned down some pretty big positions and pretty big opportunities within the VA to go serve in a local clinic down in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So can you share a little bit about your experience with the VA? And
Sure.
The VA, I remember as a Marine in the 1990s, wasn't that great, right?
Well,
Actually,
and
everybody in my era was a little afraid of the VA.
Yeah, I remember those days as well. And so that's where I felt the Lord was leading me to try to make a difference, and where I could make the greatest difference is right there on the front lines. That they had just, about a year before I retired, opened a primary care clinic in Elizabeth City, which is right down the road from where we live in Hertford. And they were having some trouble staffing it. The VA has difficulty in getting physicians at the primary care level.
Especially in rural areas.
And especially in rural areas like Elizabeth City. So I felt like I could make a bigger difference there than taking one of these bigger executive jobs either in D.C. or somewhere else, where there's always plenty of people who were willing and wanted those kind of jobs, that I could help more taking care of former sailors, airmen, Marines, soldiers, and coasties. So it was great, and I had always kept my hand in clinically, even when I was in administrative positions within the Navy. So I felt very comfortable. And to kind of talk about going full circle, I mentioned earlier that I had greatly admired Doc Snyder when I was in high school, and him being a primary care doc, and I initially saw myself as following in his footsteps. And I guess ultimately I did, obviously, many, many years later. And then in the VA, not in private practice, but still being a primary care doc in a small country clinic. So,
you shared a story with me once. Actually, we were down in North Carolina with you guys for a season, and there was a story where you had to go don your alphas, your Marine Corps alphas that you had the ability to wear, and there was a Marine, I think it was a Marine, who was acting poorly in the clinic, and you knew he was coming in, so you had a conversation with me. It's like, hey, I'm gonna put on my alphas and go in and have a conversation with this guy. Can you share that with, obviously not sharing patient information, but
right. So this, most of our veterans are absolutely great. Their families are absolutely great, but there's a few who, for whatever reason, seem to have a chip on their shoulder about the VA and VA care.
right.
And this particular guy was just verbally abusive, not to me, but to some of my staff. And he was just obnoxious and demanding, and had a strong sense of entitlement. And so I just felt like I had to remind him of where he came from. The reason he was eligible for VA care was because he was a Marine.
The uniform that he wore.
Right, and the core values of the Marine Corps and the Navy.
Yeah.
And I think it was effective. I didn't have to say much, but just remind him.
He saw you in your greeny weenie with those big birds on your shoulder, and he was like, okay.
We don't act that way, Marine.
Right.
And he said, yes, sir. And so that was that. So I had to do that just a few times. And then, of course, we'd have special event days like around Veterans Day, where former service members who worked for the VA were authorized to wear their uniform if they so chose. Now, a number of my colleagues could no longer fit in their uniforms. But for those who could, some, like I did, saw that as a great opportunity to again don the uniform. So
yeah, I'm really proud of you, Mark. You probably today could, within a couple of weeks be in your alphas again, right?
I'd have to cut out a couple of desserts, but yeah, I think I could do that. So
you always look sharp in it. It's pretty impressive.
Oh, well, thank you.
Anything at the VA that today and your time that you served in the VA, what I've noticed with soldiers, sailors, Marines who have come through my practice, the VA has made amazing changes. There's always room for improvement. But since GWAT, since the Global War on Terror, I think the VA has made leaps and bounds improvements in the care.
Oh, absolutely. And I think
for soldiers and sailors.
One particular area where I've seen just in the 8 years that I worked in the VA system before I ultimately retired was the great expansion in mental health services and social services. That when I was first at the clinic, there was one lone psychologist, and they had just hired a licensed clinical social worker. But that was it for the entire northeast part of North Carolina.
Yeah.
But then we got a psychiatrist, another psychologist, and then some great mental health assets, very specialized stuff that was offered remotely through things like Zoom meetings with these veterans to give them specialized services from these centers of excellence. So the use of technology and the expanding of mental health professionals within the Navy system. And then the other part that the VA has gotten much more willing to send people out to civilian specialists when VA care in the areas where they need help is not readily available. It used to be we had to send everybody to Hampton, which is a 120-mile round trip or more for many of my patients who lived in various parts of North Carolina.
Yeah.
Or they had to go on their own nickel. Well, now the VA has recognized that, and they give you the option still to go to Hampton I think it's 40 miles for specialty care. But if you're outside that window, and most of my patients were, they can choose to see a civilian source of care, and the VA will pay for it. So you get the best of both worlds, where there's special expertise, particularly in the area of rehab and mental health, operationally targeted mental health. You can stay in the VA system, but if you need other care, you don't have to travel these long distances anymore to get it. The VA will pay for it in sources of care closer to your home. So to me, that's a tremendous positive.
Yeah, I've seen amazing changes, and it's so often we go after bureaucracy and big government agencies, but I have to say VA has been one that I'm thankful and impressed with the changes that they made in their internal organization. They took some black eyes for a while.
They sure did, and deservedly so.
Deservedly so.
But they have made tremendous strides. And the other piece I can speak about both personally and then from a professional standpoint is they've really revamped and made it much easier on terms of veterans applying for and being granted disability. It used to be the old joke and like most old jokes, there was more than a kernel of truth in that, that every initial application was turned down.
Right.
They wanted to see if you really meant it, so you had to resubmit a second time after denial. But now it's much, much easier. They're much more proactive and friendly, receptive to taking the application, helping the veteran with it, and a more timely turnaround of those applications and getting our veterans the disability help that they deserve.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I grew up in an era where Marines, you didn't go to sick call.
Right.
You prided yourself on falling out for PT or going to the range with a cold or feeling bad or a backache or bad knees and just grinding your way through it. And so no one ever knew the brutal beating you were putting on your body, especially infantry, Marines, or guys in the Navy who were down in boiler rooms and constant knee and back injuries that just didn't get reported.
Right.
And today, the military has become much wiser to the fact that a healthy Marine, a healthy sailor is a sailor that can accomplish its mission. And so I think we've learned a lot from it. Now, there's always that small group of folks who abuse
Right.
any system that you put in place. They're going to find a way to manipulate it.
Right.
But more so than not, I've been super, super impressed and proud of what the VA's done. And I know you were instrumental part of that. So again, thanks for that service.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to put you on the hot seat now.
Okay.
And I can give you a couple seconds to think about this. But if you're talking to one of your grandchildren or great-grandchildren at this point,
Got those too.
what advice do you have for a young man, young lady who says, Grandpa, I'm thinking about joining the military? What are you saying to him today?
Wait till there's a change of administration. And I say that with a great deal of sadness, but your son Isaiah just got out of the Army, and I've heard this from other sources too, that the military has become woke. There's a woke mentality that's infected the most senior leadership, and it's filtered out through the rest of the branches. And so I'm got both fingers crossed that
There's a leadership change coming.
Right.
Hopefully.
Hope and pray, and that. So I would say, given that the election is next month, is wait a little bit and let's see which way the political winds are blowing, and if we get the administration change I'm hoping for, that then I think we'll quickly see a change in the culture of the military in a more positive
I know
sense.
that's painful for you to say because you served a very distinguished career. Our family is deep and rich in Naval, Marine, Army, Airmen, Coasties, in Naval service of serving. And I know it's not easy for you to say, but the culture and where we are today, I would have to say I concur with you that it's not what it used to be. And when you see the massive exodus that's taking on first-year contracts, and it's usually high anyway, that you have about a 93% attrition rate, I think it is, across the board with enlisted. First contract, 93% of those don't re-enlist. And we're at a period of time where recruiting is way, way, way down. Morale is not super high. Those that are currently serving are serving honorably, and very thankful for those who are grinding it out.
Oh, amen.
In the environment that we're in today. By the way, Isaiah shared with me today, the podcast I did before you was Josh Morgan, primitive woodsman who's the knife maker. And his business was practically destroyed. 3/4 of his building is caved in on itself. And
Oh, my gosh.
he's still operating in what's probably going to be a condemned building here soon.
Oh, my gosh.
Because he's just got to get, work out, and he's got employees that need help. And so the first few days of their situation hasn't been good in terms of federal support. But he said what was inspiring for him is the local families, the local just normal citizen rallying, call it the militia, right?
Right.
They all banded together, pooled their resources, and have figured out how to help each other in community, which is always great pride that I have for us as Americans, even though we can politically be separate on our issues. When tragedy occurs or when calamity occurs, we still have that American spirit that we're all Americans and we can come together. And I would like to announce today that the thing that we heard from Isaiah and his buddies at the 101st Airborne Air Assault, they activated 500 of them today to go to Asheville,
Oh,
North
wonderful.
Carolina.
Oh, wow.
So there's There's choppers en route.
Great. Boy, those folks need
They
all the
really-
help they can get.
They really do. And so, shout out to those folks. But, 10 years from now, I'll have grandkids, grandsons who can serve.
Mhm.
You'll have great grandsons who can serve.
Isn't that amazing?
During the period that we went in, there's nothing more honorable I could tell them to do. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
That it's the duty, the opportunity to serve your country. It was amazing for me as an enlisted guy what the Marine Corps did for me, being early on a college dropout and football not working the way I expected it to.
Mm-hmm.
The Marine Corps is the best thing that ever happened to me in my career. And sitting here today interviewing a naval officer, what do you think has to change in our society, in order for your mindset to change about telling your grandson or granddaughter to go serve?
Well, and
Not just the political, like
Right.
who's president, but that woke piece.
well, I think it's that tapping into that natural need or desire to serve others. I mean, you mentioned it in this post-Helene calamity, how Americans have come together and are helping each other out. And we heard a bunch of stories about that as we were driving up on Fox. But I think back, and I'm heartened by, you look at our country, this is a little before your time, but I remember, the military was not highly esteemed in the early to mid-'70s, right after the end of the Vietnam War. Nobody wanted to sign up. Recruiting was way down. And it was just, a military career was like a last resort.
Yeah, like you must have failed at something.
Right.
Now you're going to go join.
Right.
Yeah.
And how that turned around so effectively by the time that I joined in the late 70s, early 80s is, again, it was considered a prestigious line of work if you chose to join the military. And I think it was all tied to that. The bad memories faded about the Vietnam debacle and that natural tendency of individuals, particularly young people, to want to make something of their lives to serve others came back to the forefront. And I'm hopeful the same thing will happen in the near future again. And you see in these young people who do volunteer either to serve in the military or serve their fellow man in different ways, that natural, almost innate desire to do something meaningful with your life and in your life by helping others.
Yeah.
I think we can tap into that. And again, leadership fads or ideas come and go. I saw a bunch of different philosophical shifts during my military career. Now, what I hope is that our current leadership has not lost the ultimate focus on mission. The way you best achieve the mission, you can argue or have discussions about the best way to do that, the kind of culture you establish, but the focus needs to always remain on getting the job done. And I hope we haven't lost that, but I'm confident that that kernel of focus on operational effectiveness has never been lost. So we can change the culture, change the focus of developing the military culture as long as we focus on that esprit de corps and getting the job done for the good of the American people.
Great advice. Another question for your grandkids and great-grandkids. If there's one book that you would tell them to spend time in reading, absorbing, what advice would you give them there?
It would be the Bible. And
How so? Why so?
Well, and this is something that I came to much later than I wish I had in my life, is that, particularly coupled with a good commentary, I like MacArthur's, John MacArthur's, but there's many good ones, is that you can really, particularly if you do it from a subject-related standpoint, and commentaries help you do that, is on virtually every subject that you could face in life, that
It's in one of those 66 books.
God has already addressed it in one of those 66 books. And so I've read the Bible through a couple of times, and that's been very beneficial. But then,
And not only, I'm going to brag on you a little bit again, not only have you read the Bible through a couple of times, but you went back to school, which for a senior man,
yes, I'm an old guy.
60-something, you're back in school going for your MDiv?
Well, I started as MDiv, but then the Spirit told me I wasn't quite, that ministry was not my field. So I've switched to, I'm still in the School of Divinity at Regent University, and I'm finishing up a degree in a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics and Cosmogony, which is...
Oh, that's a mouthful.
Yeah. So basically, understanding the underpinnings of the Christian faith, primarily through a better understanding of what's written in Scripture.
And is that another master's or is that a doctorate?
It's a master's now, and of course I could go on to my doctorate if I so
you
choose.
already got one of those, so you're
yeah. So and so
who needs two doctors, right?
Yeah, doctors. So, but that's been great. This systematic study of the Bible.
Has it changed anything for you spiritually by taking this academic approach to your faith?
Well, I think the biggest help to me personally is I, like so many folks who are trained in the scientific fields, sometimes earlier in my life after being born again, I felt there was kind of a dichotomy. I had my professional training and knowledge, my head knowledge, and then my spiritual faith, my knowledge of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. But that the science realm was here, the spiritual realm was here. Where my studies have helped me is see that there's really, if you look at the natural record, if you look at what we find in science in the right way, it fully supports what the Lord told us about the unfolding of creation in the Bible. There's no dichotomy. They can be fully integrated. And that the natural record does, in fact, if it's properly interpreted, fully support the tale of creation or the story of creation in Genesis and other books of the Bible.
So it sounds like it only shored up your beliefs and
yes,
where a lot of people who go into the sciences will walk away from their faith or deny the existence of.
Right,
the spiritual realm.
It's almost an unspoken thought that the rational or scientific mind cannot coexist with a spiritual mind. And so you either kept them totally separate. The Greeks called it dualism.
Yeah,
spirit life, natural life, or thinking.
Yeah,
or you walk away from the spiritual side, and so I'm so thankful the Spirit showed me that through this course of study that the two can be fully integrated. And I think it makes me a better scientific thinker as well as a better theologian.
What do you do with that? Is that just a personal goal, or what do you do with it afterwards?
Well, we'll see which way the Lord leads me. As part of my training, I was exposed to a lot of materials from an organization called Reasons to Believe. It's headquartered out of California, but they're a group of theologically minded scientists from various scientific disciplines, and they put out a bunch of materials that show this level of integration. So I think there may be a role for me there, and I've applied to be part of their scholar community.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's news today.
Yeah, it's brand new. I just finished the application this week. So.
Oh, wow. Well, congrats.
Well, we'll see what happens with that. So we'll see.
We can't say fingers crossed. We have to say we'll pray that
right.
God leads it.
The Lord is going to guide me, and if this is not the right path, He'll show me another branch in the road.
Maybe you can be a podcaster.
Yeah. I think I'm too low tech for that, Kenny.
I don't know. Grandma, anything that you would sage advice that you would add to Grandpa's thoughts here on grandbabies and great grandbabies?
Do I have to do it without crying?
You can try, but that's okay.
No, I'm just so incredibly proud of the blessings Father God has given us through Mark, through you and your family, and the journeys we've taken along the way, and the wonderful babies and grandbabies He's blessed us with, and we just, as long as we listen to Him and let Him guide our paths, I think we're all going to be good in this life, and then we'll spend eternity together with Jesus.
Amen.
Wise words.
Well said, sweetheart.
Mark, anything else you want to share with us in part today? I've kept you here long enough. I've got to go pee.
Yeah,
so.
you and me both, brother.
Me too.
It must be the age, right?
Yeah, you get to be
I'm catching up to you.
Yes.
Well,
It's been great. Thanks for the opportunity. I enjoyed the conversation, and it's been great reminiscing on some things I hadn't thought about for a while. So thanks for that opportunity.
it's awesome. You can always come back. You're welcome to sit in that seat.
Oh, well, thank you. I
The more
appreciate
times
it.
you come back, though, the harder it gets. The more we get you on the real hot seat.
Yeah.
But yeah, we love you. Honored
Love
to
you
do
too.
this with you today. And we'll be honored to share this with our kids and grandkids and generations to come. That's the beautiful thing about technology today is that
Isn't that great? Yeah.
we can turn to dust, but this can
Right.
hang around. And I met in a tax workshop the other day at Chesapeake Library. I'm walking out the door, and there's this guy wearing a Marine Corps ball cap. And I could tell he's an aged fellow. And I told him thank you for his service at Semper Fi. And his daughter-in-law spoke up and says, he just turned 100 years old today.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
And he
God love
served
him.
the Battle of Iwo Jima
Oh, my gosh.
and survived it, which it's a big, big battle
Oh, my gosh.
for Marines. Probably
Wow.
one of the most impactful. I mean, the flag on the Iwo Jima, that stands out in every Marine's mind.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, it just made me feel thankful again that they're in that generation, your generation, of people who were still volunteers. They were there because they wanted to be there. And that's why I still love interviewing veterans, because we're in a career field of folks who still 100% volunteer. There might be some that get a little voluntold, maybe through the court system every once in a while, but the overwhelming majority of our soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coasties, airmen are there because they wanted to serve.
Right.
And
God love them.
think about Grandma Rachel and
Yeah.
Grandpa Bob, and
Grandma was a wave, Grandpa Bob.
that after Pearl Harbor, that's what you did. You just went
Right.
in and served your country.
Yeah. Do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mark, thanks for doing hard things and
Well, thank you for having
having
me.
a great career as a sailor. And proud to be as a Marine, Department of the Navy. The men's department.
Men's department.
You know I was going to say it,
I
right?
knew you
I
were
knew
I was
you
going to
would.
slip it in somewhere today. So, thank you, sir. I got my hand out here. I
Thank
would
you.
give you a salute, but I'm not in uniform, and
Understood.
so the handshake will have to do today.
Well, thank you for having us. It was great.
Thanks for being on. All right.
Thank you, Ken.
Love you. Love you guys.
Love you too.
Point wherever you reduce speed to 180.
Blackbox.